Welcome to Health Creators, where we discuss new creations in healthcare and building the future of health innovation. This is Liv. I'm a health tech founder in the clinical trial space, and I'm joined here today by Luisa Schaffgotsch, founder of Impli, building the future of fertility and hormone regulation. I wonder how much Impli has changed since we last spoke, because from my understanding, it was essentially initially a implantable technology to help women who suffered from issues with fertility.
Yes, and we're still there. It's still a big mission. It's still a big problem. So we kind of fully focused on that as an application, just because we saw the need for it, and there's like loads of things that have driven that decision making. We're almost 70% female founded team. And so we all knew how much suffering hormone level monitoring is. And different people, suffer from different things. I suffer from polycystic ovaries, right? And then so how do I do hormone level monitoring? It doesn't really work. Point in time doesn't give you the information that you need in order to treat it properly. Same goes with IVF treatments. And in IVF treatments, a woman has to go through monitoring her hormone levels every 2 to 3 days. That's over the period of 1 to 3 months, depending on where she starts. And actually, one of our advisors decided to be our advisor. He's a professor of gynecology, just because he gets women who've been through 10 plus cycles of IVF, and they just don't have any veins anymore, even to monitor. And so one of the big things we deliver with this is safety to the patients, more precision in the whole treatment, and obviously convenience for the women themselves.
I mean, can we take it like a couple steps back, because I've never been through the IVF process. So for me to wrap my head around it, I'm trying to understand. So you go in currently, and essentially you go through, did you say 10 cycles you can go to?
You up to, more. Some women go through more. It depends really on how successful the cycles are. It depends on your age. It depends on your physiology.
And a cycle is basically where I put specific hormones, I inject specific hormones to grow essentially eggs that can then be harvested and used for
absolutely. So we should use artificial reproductive treatment, because that's the a bit broader span to IVF. IVF is very specific and a very specific part of this. But in artificial reproductive treatment, normally you start with, and there's also differences in that. Normally you start with harvesting eggs. So you give specific drugs to stimulate your egg production, and then at some point you harvest them. If you then go through an IVF treatment straight away, then you freeze some of them, and one of them you fertilize in vitro. So, in a petri dish, ultimately, with the sperm of your partner, that gets incubated over time. And in that process, your body gets put ready for receiving that fertilized egg into your uterus again. And so then comes the implantation step, where you implant the fertilized embryo into the uterus, and then the uterus has to accept it and has to grow it. And, there's huge variations. The human body and the female body is complicated.
So all of the steps in this pathway have a failure rate, essentially.
And the pregnancy has a failure rate, of course.
And so that's why you kind of have to go through these different cycles in order for it to work, because it's probably not all the stars will align. Maybe the first
it's a 15% success rate.
15%.
Depending on your age, of course.
Is that per cycle?
No, overall for the treatment for you to become pregnant.
So even if I did 10 cycles, it doesn't guarantee that I will become pregnant.
Women who are 42 just have very low chances, just because menopause or premenopause is already hit.
At 40?
Generally, it depends on the woman, which is why I'm saying it depends on the physiology of the woman. It's not so simple. But I think there's average numbers out there. So a woman that's 38 on average goes through about 8 cycles.
It's kind of crazy, because people always think, okay, let's have kids when you're 30 something, right? And then I meet women and they're like, don't wait till you're 35, because at 35, you are high risk already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get treated as high risk at that point already. And, it's quite late in a woman's reproductive cycle. So our social norms have adapted, but our bodies haven't, right?
Yeah.
So women are going into careers. That means that, the earliest that they have made it to some level of career where they're then happy with their output, and the effort they put into building it is later in their 30s, but then your body isn't ready anymore. And so it creates this paradigm. And so loads of people are seeking out egg freezing in the late 20s and early 30s.
But even if you freeze your eggs, right?
Yeah.
We still need to get your body primed and all of these steps in order for that egg to be first fertilized. Will it accept the sperm? Will then this fertilized egg be accepted into your body? Will then you be able to carry this pregnancy into term? Right?
Absolutely. Or you get a surrogacy, right? But there's a huge growing market, but that might not be what you want. Of course, at that point. And it's a difficult decision to make. And women as well as men suffer greatly from infertility. Yeah. It's a huge growing problem in the world.
So your question is, can we use technology to almost like modernize our reproductive cycles in a way? Right?
Or help us guide there, right?
Yeah.
Help us get more data. At the moment, like clinicians go into this blind, and why IVF treatments haven't been around for long. It's been since the 70s was the first IVF baby. So it's been, a short blip in our timeline. So it's not a very, it's a very precise procedure, but there's lots of optimization to do in this. And as more women are doing IVF treatments, it's about a 10% growing market per year. It also becomes more necessary to treat them more effectively.
Because it's potentially dangerous. I think we've spoken about this, right? But in this entire cyclical journey, you're basically putting a lot of concentrated hormones into someone for certain time periods. And this is dangerous because hormones are a very fine balance in your body, right? Achieving homeostasis is a very difficult task for your body, and putting that out of whack can cause a lot of downturn effects, right?
Yeah, some of them are totally unspoken about, which is sad. I don't see many IVF communities. It's not a very often spoken about issue. It should be spoken about
because
more.
It's still taboo.
It's still taboo, of course. You're not going to go to your employer and say, I am going through an IVF treatment. You don't know if you're going to be successful or not. And B, it puts your position in question. So I know many women who go through their IVF treatments, booking their diaries with coffee breaks. But then how many coffee breaks can you take in a month, right? So it's tricky for women to manage, and it's still taboo. It's still very much taboo. And it's a long process. It's not even a short process. It's about 1.5 years.
1.5 years.
Sure.
To go through the treatment and get to the point where you can have potentially 15% of a chance of having a baby.
Yeah, for sure. Like so many women go through this. Some women are extremely lucky and have like first hit for a first chance and it worked. But most don't.
And so at the moment, I, as a female, if I'm going through IVF, go and see the doctor, you said 2-3 times a week. And at these consultations, they will check my hormone levels to ensure that nothing's going wrong, essentially. Because again, every day I'm injecting myself, pumping myself full of hormones. And it is during these, consultations at that moment, they take my bloods that they know, okay, in this moment, I'm okay.
Yeah. They also take ultrasounds to check on your ovaries if it's about that. And you're right with this.
Yeah.
The big problem at the moment that the IVF market faces, and I hope that we can build some sort of solution for that in the future, is there's no standardization. You'll go, I've spoken to over 50 clinics.
Yeah.
You go to one clinic, it's completely different in process
Really?
than when you go to the other clinic. That creates obviously, huge problems, right? Because you then have no standard process. You then have quite a lot of risk because some women are very sensitive to hormones. You know, like if you inject them with too much, they overstimulate, and that can leave long-term effects that can go up to death, right?
Yeah.
There is a percentage of women who do die from this.
Die from IVF?
Sure, from stimulation of the ovaries.
Oh gosh.
So, you know, it's not very much talked about, and of course it's, you know, a procedure that you choose to do.
So it's almost like, oh, you chose to do it, so.
I wouldn't go that far, but but it can be dangerous, and I don't think there's enough monitoring out there at the moment, because even if you think about it, if you draw blood at one point in time, that might absolutely not reflect what happens 30 minutes after, or an hour after, or 2 hours after, and so the accuracy that you get with this is not enough.
Yeah, because hormones can fluctuate substantially, right?
Yeah, and very quickly as well.
Yeah.
They shoot up and then they go down. I mean, we all know it from, you know, having our period, right? Your hormones change within a
10
day.
seconds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you feel it and you're like, oh, here we go.
Yeah. And what are like the key kind of risks you've seen, right, in these women going through IVF? What is like the number one killer?
So overstimulation of the ovaries, you know, that is a dangerous thing that can happen. You know, it's about 30% of women who experience it, but it's only about, I think it's 0.1% of women who, you know, die from it. And I think it's 1% of women that have serious effects from it. That's one side, but it's actually the procedure itself. It's psychologically straining because you want to become pregnant. And you have failed pregnancies, right? And failed pregnancies are sometimes miscarriages.
Yeah.
And imagine going through 8 of those.
Oh gosh.
And wanting to become pregnant. It's very emotionally straining as well. So I think there's a huge thing to be said about mental health in this procedure. And it not being addressed maybe sometimes as good as it should.
Yeah.
Because it is straining. And, you know, we've all heard of couples, you know, saying we're not going to do this anymore because it's too mentally straining.
And so the idea behind Impli was let's create essentially a way that people can standardize the process of IVF.
Let's create a way to capture more data about the actual woman.
Yeah.
Right. So in the IVF process, for example, when it comes around the fertilization of the embryo, you've got real-time monitoring of the embryos and, you know, and like time series monitoring. That's very advanced technology, but then you know nothing about the woman who's actually supposed to, you know, carry the baby.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like, when we went through this, I said, okay, you know, we could have built a device for diabetes or cardiovascular disease. And I was like, actually fertility, because no one's doing anything about it, but so many women need it. And IVF, the most out of all, in my opinion. Just so we can help them out, deliver more data to them, so that they can know where they're at, but also so the clinician can know where they're at with the woman's, you know, situation at that point.
Yeah, and Impli has it changed, or is it the same in terms of it's essentially a little device you put into your hand and it's able to track your hormone? Yeah, so it's
the upper arm. We're working to deploy in the upper arm because it's a little bit more stable to the body. It's a small implantable, so similar to glucose monitors or cardiovascular disease monitors. It can be read with any smartphone. You scan it, you get the data out, and obviously platform links to the clinic directly, or the ERP system of the clinic directly. And that data can then be used. That's where we're at. And we're monitoring 3 different hormones. So,
which ones?
Estradiol, progesterone, and luteinizing hormone.
Okay. And by monitoring these hormones, you can basically identify when women are at risk from basically overstimulation of their ovaries, what other information can you pull from this?
For example, there's quite a lot of evidence and research that luteinizing hormone pulsates when the uterus is ready to receive. And
interesting.
The problem with pulsating hormones is like point in time doesn't give us good information, right? Because like it's up and down, you have no idea. And these pulsations are very indicative of how to do precision medicine in this respect. And that's one of the good things with luteinizing hormone. Progesterone is obviously interesting in the whole cycle, but it's very interesting in early stages of pregnancy. Women who do suffer from recurring miscarriages, so who can't keep the child, they often get supplemented with progesterone so that they can, because high progesterone levels indicate pregnancy. And being able to monitor that will give clinicians a much better approach on how to supplement and how much to supplement for these women.
Yeah.
And so we cover from the beginning of the cycle to the very end.
Interesting. Are there other factors that you're looking at in the future that could also impact basically how well women, I want to say adopt, but adopt like the child, right? How well they take on the embryo. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so long term, if we think about this long term, we're collecting data sets that have never existed. Think about overlapping this with, for example, genetic data.
Yeah.
Like that we can say at the very beginning, before the woman even starts the cycle, what the best treatment is for that specific woman. What might be her, the correct dosages that she's supposed to use. And that only happens by overlaying phenotypic and genotypic data with one another. So that would be one of the long-term angles that we're hoping to solve so that we can reduce the amounts of cycles that we have for one woman.
Interesting. So moving from like the average 10 cycles to something that is a little bit more manageable.
Or, there's loads of companies at the moment working on how can I deliver this treatment to women at home so they have more convenience.
And is there a kind of, so when we talk about cycles, do you just repeat the same process 10 times or are we modifying things like for each cycle? So it's like, okay, we tried it like with experiment 1 and these variables did not work. And so now in cycle 2, we're going to change.
Well,
Is there an element of that or no?
No, there's no standardization. So that's a very difficult answer to give because probably every clinician works very differently in this space.
Okay.
And so some might do it that way, some might do it differently. I also think there's a huge element of the woman in there. Your hormones aren't the same all the time. So 1 month you might have a 28-day cycle and the next month you might have, like think of it that way, right? So 1 month you might be really stressed and your hormone levels might be totally out of whack, which means supplementing hormones, so it's very personalized every single cycle depending on what happens.
So this is almost like a way of making IVF more precise.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we strive for. Reducing the amounts of cycles, precision IVF, safety for women.
I see.
Let's do this with data. Yeah. We monitor cardiovascular patients. We monitor who are get given drugs, Yeah. Of course, they have a much higher risk and, it's a very different group of risks. But we should be monitoring these women too.
Yeah. Is there a use case for this in contraception down the line? Yeah. Because I feel like just in general, there's not a lot of information about the hormones they give us. Yeah. We get pumped full of random hormones, right? And if we're saying, IVF has negative impacts because essentially you are pumping people full of hormones that wouldn't be there otherwise. What about the fact that most women have to take hormones on a daily basis and we don't really know what that does?
Absolutely. Right? I mean, the use cases beyond IVF are affecting every single woman. And it starts with contraception. We give 14-year-old girls the same dose as we give, grown women at 35. And the question is, how does that,
impact their development?
Impact their development or impact long-term. And these studies it's really hard to track these things. But hopefully, what we are aiming for is to keep on developing our products so that we can help in contraception or the choice of contraception, that we can help in natural pregnancies. So, if someone just wants to get pregnant and doesn't need to go through an IVF treatment, help with polycystic ovaries, for example, help with endometriosis, help with menopause. That's a huge part that comes later in life. And I think the most requests we get are from women who are going through menopause who just ask me, my hormones are all over the place. I need something that tells me what's happening.
Because it's just not knowing that is like the key problem, you think?
And not being able to treat it, right? So you have hormone replacement treatment for women who are undergoing the menopause, and
but you don't know which hormones to replace unless you have like an accurate measure. Basically.
A woman who's premenopausal, her hormones aren't stable. They go up and down and up and down and up and down. So treating it is kind of like let's see what this does.
So it's still very trial and error today.
For menopause, for sure. And obviously women suffer greatly. And there's been some great exposure now about this that maybe was more of a taboo subject in the past, whereas women speaking up and saying, actually, my kids are finally out of the house. I finally made it into my job. I'm, have a great position. I'm really happy. And all of a sudden this happens and I can't sleep anymore. And I, gain weight and and all the side effects that menopause produces.
Could Impli be a diagnostic tool?
Yeah, we want it to be.
Yeah. And what are the barriers to doing that? Right.
We need large clinical trials.
Yeah.
We need to capture data. We need the right regulatory approvals. These are huge barriers to overcome, but stepping one step in front of the other. And that's the aim at the end.
So, but the initial goal is let's get this use case out to IVF clinics.
Yes. Let's get this use case out to IVF clinics. Let's establish our market there. And then let's trickle down to everywhere else where we can deliver value with this. Similarly to what diabetic monitors did. They started with type 1 diabetes. They went to type 2 diabetes. Now they're doing athletes and doing pregnancy. So, pregnancy diabetes.
Because I remember you guys used to have a kind of direct to consumer arm, right? Didn't you have a place in Shoreditch?
Yeah, before the pandemic.
That you were giving women this tool to be able to measure their hormones.
No, that wasn't this product. We wouldn't have been able to deploy that like that. We had a device that was our kind of prototype devices, or we still have it. But COVID happened in between, so we had to pivot, like so many founders. And it holds your medical details. So it was the beginning of this platform that we wanted to advance. Then COVID happened. We had to shut down everything, so we couldn't continue. And we said, let's focus on our end goal. And so we invested into
I see.
goal.
So this device is a different device.
Yeah. It's a different device. Same concept, same way of functioning. Many things are the same. But we have a sense of functionality now that goes on top of it.
I see. And so it wouldn't be essentially available direct to consumer for some time.
At the moment, we're not thinking about that. We're working on a B2C model because we think that monitoring hormone levels like this needs guidance by a clinician. And we are not yet in the position to offer that guidance, whereas clinicians who look at the data are. And so I strongly suggest that any clinical data like this is actually also analyzed and interpreted by a clinician. Obviously, maybe in 10 years down the line, we'll have strong enough AI tools who can support us in doing that. But we need a lot of data for that. And so in the beginning, we're sticking to a B2B2C model just to provide safety.
Yeah. And they're probably your best users, right? If they're honestly like using it on behalf of the patients in a way, right? Because right now, like, I guess the way it seems to work is you have these like IVF clinicians who are like farmers essentially, who know the soil of their land. But like all the soil is different. So they're almost like the ones kind of co-building this with you to make the analysis of the data much more useful for the patients, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. This goes into clinical trials and what we're doing on that front. But clinicians are vital in this. And this tool arguably is almost more for the clinician than it is for the woman.
Yeah.
Right. We're making their job easier. We're making their job more accurate. We're making, every clinician comes into being a clinician because they want to do good and they want to help and they want to save people and they want to make people's lives better.
Yeah.
And we're giving them a tool that allows them to do that compared to what they're doing now.
Do you also see this as a tool that could be used in clinical trials? Because I think that's like a very interesting use case, right? So women were actually banned from taking part in clinical research until 1993. And most of the medications we have today are made for white men. Yeah. So would this be a channel essentially where we can actually create medicines for women?
Absolutely. And this is one of the things, we're working on as well. I think there's a huge clinical trial angle. It helps us gather the data for going to market, but it helps companies who go through clinical trials to go through that. And in my opinion, it's not only for fertility drugs.
Yeah.
It's actually, clinical trials in anything. If you think about hormones, they do govern our own whole life.
Yeah.
They are metabolites of other hormones or other neurotransmitters or other parts, so either testosterone or cortisol or, and then, there's many. And so they tell us a lot. And so there's, for example, studies that have been done I think it was a study in India, where they found out that, LH, for example, is linked to PTSD in men. So even for men, there's a huge use case in it.
Yeah.
Because it records long-term stress.
Yeah. And I guess if hormonal cycles can tell you how likely you are to adopt the embryo, it probably can tell you how likely you are to be responsive to certain medications, right? When we're talking about life-threatening conditions, sometimes it's not that the medication doesn't have efficacy, it's that there's a low adoption rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. We can look at many factors of that, right? And it's really important to do more monitoring. And I think in clinical trials, and you'll probably know most, lots of tech is starting to be adopted and patients are starting to be monitored much more accurately. And precision medicine is coming to the forefront because it actually gives evidence, hey, this drug is actually working, or actually we need to look closer because the safety of this isn't as accurate as we want it to be.
And now that you're like a expert on kind of hormone level data, what do you think are like the key differences you see in maybe hormone monitoring for men versus women?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm an expert on hormone level data yet, but that's what we're working towards. And that's, the great vision. I think men and women are governed by hormones.
Yeah.
And, testosterone for men is maybe the biggest one, or there's actually so many nuances to this.
Yeah.
I think they're really important to keep track of.
Yeah.
I think there's a great risk with over monitoring, or monitoring for the wrong reasons. And so we're building kind of ethical tools, so that, you're not going to be suddenly addicted to
tracking your hormones.
Every 5 minutes, or that we, guide people into how many times they look on their phone. That's not the aim. And And I think that there's huge things to be said about men too.
Yeah.
And I think this is nothing that we're taking lightly. And I think, yes, we're focusing on IVF and we're focusing on women with our first product, but that doesn't mean that our product is, only for women. It is also for men, and tracking their statuses.
And does the male hormonal cycle tell you anything about fertility in men?
I haven't looked into that too much because that's not what we're working on right now. And an endocrinologist would be best to comment probably, but I can only imagine, and would be a good question to ask an endocrinologist. How? But obviously, hormones also also involved in sperm production. So
that makes sense. And I think the last time we spoke, you were about to raise this round. And when did it close?
So last time we spoke, I think we were about to raise our £2 million seed round, and then for many reasons, it didn't go as we had hoped it to go, and we ended up taking convertible notes in, and we had a very difficult and challenging time to make that journey, but it was the right decision we made in the end, to go with very trusted investors that are supporting us. And we've got the convertible notes, and now we're going for a second seed round at the moment.
Again?
Yeah.
It's like a...
Yeah. Was just told yesterday this will be the rest of my job.
Oh, just fundraising.
Slowly and low amounts so that you can build your valuation and showcase, we've actually made progress.
And now you're raising, and you're going to use this to kind of build out this second prototype. And I guess there's a lot in hardware, right?
Yeah. So I don't, it's funny. There's not many hardware startups.
No.
And fundraising for hardware is, tough to say the least. And I don't know why, because I'm always saying, well, if you don't have the hardware, you don't have the data.
Yes.
The value lies in the data,
Exactly.
And I don't think that's been very much adopted by the world of investors.
No, but they're not really thinking about the long term if they're not willing to invest in the hardware. Because if you look at what's happening to Facebook and Meta, right? I think a lot of people are saying that the only reason we're seeing this massive pivot into Meta was because Apple changed its regulations, meaning that Facebook could no longer collect certain types of data. So they were like, how do we create our own device, our own data sets, right? And ultimately, if you are going down the data play, it's always going to be the owner of the hardware, the controller, the ultimate controller of the data that wins, right?
And even that is, in my opinion, an ethical stance, right? In my opinion, the controller of the data should be the individual. And it should be with the individual. And we're working on solutions at the moment and, with using blockchain and other technologies on how to make the data that we do collect decentralized so that it is actually owned by the person, but we can still use it for bigger analysis for the good of everyone, but that we have no control over what that person does with their own data. So if they wanted to go and sell it, or if they wanted to go and share it, they could do so. But it would be, the ledger would be on their side.
And then, I guess the other point we've spoken about before was maybe this hesitancy of people when it comes to implantable technology, which I always find weird, right? Because I guess women have been using implants since the 1980s, right?
Even before that.
Oh, right. Because
in the Roman days.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, in the Roman days, they would stop women becoming pregnant with pieces of copper that they would insert into the cervix.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, implantable technology has essentially been around for since the Roman Empire. So it's a bit odd. I guess because there isn't equivalent to men and most investors are male, maybe there's this kind of disconnect. Or are you finding that most of the people and the partners you work with are women?
so most of the investors, and it depends who you speak to, you know, and we're backed by, you know, great venture fund that's female led. But, you know, most of them that we speak to, especially the bigger ones, I find, are led by men. That doesn't mean that there's only men in the company, but like when I look at the partners and the partners that are decision-making partners, they tend to be men.
So there's a kind of education piece to this.
There is with some. So sometimes we get the question like, do women actually need this? And then I'm like, I don't know. Well, ask a woman, and she'll tell you about her hormone levels during her lifetime. So we sometimes do get these moments. Thank God they're becoming less and less. But they're sometimes eye-opening on where people are in the state of mind. I find the question always ridiculous because I'm like, okay, you know, if someone would take away your phone tomorrow, how would you feel? And why would you feel an implant is more invasive than your phone? Your phone is already so invasive. We're already so far into this that, you know, what's the difference? I think people get, you know, a little bit shy around, okay, you know, it's inside my body kind of situation. But I don't, you know, we've adopted it in, as I said, in diabetes. This whole sports community adopted it through that. If you think about the Abbott Libre devices, those are microneedles, they're inside of your skin.
But why not go down the microneedling approach for Impli?
We thought about it. Microneedles have upsides and downsides. The devices only last for 14 days, I think, at the moment. I think a couple of longer lasting ones out there. And B, there's an infection risk, and then you still have a sticker on it, then you have a stigma, right? Like once you recognize the sticker, you're like, oh, she's doing IVF.
And
so we want
so this is privacy element to that.
We want to keep it more discreet, and I believe in the freedom, and this might be counterintuitive to how other people think. I believe in the freedom of humans to do what they want to do in that moment. So if I want to go and I want to jump into the swimming pool, you know, I don't want to have to think about, is this thing going to like come off me? Like an implant is totally protected by its own body. And that's what makes them great. But in cardiovascular disease, for example, we've got fully implanted devices. They're called iLink devices. iLink, for example. Like there's loads of variants of it. They're monitors for, I think it's, they do ECGs for 3 years straight. There's
cool.
It's a $1 billion market. People with arrhythmias and so on.
I did not know that.
So it's very adopted. It's just that the general population isn't yet, maybe sometimes on this. It changed massively over COVID. In the beginning, we had this argument all the time, like, implants. And now people are totally fine with it. They're like, yep, totally understand it, get it, no problem. When can I have it?
I mean, because people don't want to go into the clinics, right? The hospitals like 3 times a week anymore. I think it used to be the norm-ish that people like to hang out in hospitals and clinics way more. And now it's like, I don't go unless absolutely necessary.
Totally. But also like people got so used to wearables, right? Like I've got the smart ring, right? People are so used to having their data. So they're like, okay, I need more data points. Of course I need more data points. And I think they weren't aware before the pandemic because A, the healthcare awareness wasn't there. And B, the need to be healthy wasn't as strong. People didn't think, okay, preventative health, which is the coin term of this. People didn't think of like, how can I be healthier? It wasn't there yet.
And this could also be a mechanism of preventative, right? In the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. A big one for this because you can monitor and you can intervene much earlier than later. And when we think about diets and so on, diets and hormone levels very connected. There's huge things to be done in the nutrition space.
But what are like the key milestones you're gonna hit right after you get
the rest of the round? So we are obviously, we're hardware companies, so IP is a very big issue for us, and it's a very big topic for us. So we're building our portfolio. So it'll go into building our portfolio there. It'll go into taking the device that we have now and building a manufacturing cycle through it. So you can't iterate as fast with hardware because you make something with components where supply chain is important. That works or doesn't work, and then you have to go back and reiterate it. And when you have to build a manufacturing cycle, so how do you manufacture this very advanced device on a larger scale? You know, that's another layer of complexity that we have to go through. So our manufacturers are based in Switzerland and we manufacture there. And so it's going through this iterative process together and saying, how do we safely manufacture these devices so that we can go through regulatory compliance?
Yeah. And is the compliance part also what you're factoring in now, in terms of, okay, we're creating a scalable version of this. Now we need to get compliance done as well.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely factored in. We've got quite an extensive a model for the future to model how our expenses are going to look and why.
Yeah.
And we've modeled it out to, I think, 7 years. So
7 years. Wow. Yeah.
It's and you need to a degree with a hardware device, and with a regulated device.
Yeah.
And you know when these milestones will happen, or you should know at least. And this funding round will get us to the point where we are submitting for approval, but not where we've been granted approval. So we'd have to then go for a Series A round where this will take us through granted approval and go to market as well as clinical trials. Yeah. So those are our milestones that we're hitting. But it's a journey. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like you've done so much, though, since I've last seen you.
Yeah, and you should come to our labs. We're over in White City. So I think it's a part of Imperial. So we span part of our team out of Imperial, and we're 9 people now, of which 5 scientists. So we're quite strong on the tech side. But we're literally opposite the Imperial building in White City, and that's really helpful. And it's a place called Scale Space, and it's awesome. And you should come by. So
100%. How important was the Imperial network for you in building out Impli?
Yeah. I'm a strange founder from Imperial because I didn't spin out, right? I left Imperial. I went into industry for 10 years, and then I said, "Hey, the world really needs this, and I can't shake it, so I need to do it." And so I did it. But the Imperial network was important later in the business. When when the team joined us, when we span out the IP, when we needed support like the labs and so on. And I think it will become extremely important collaboration for the future and where we are.
Yeah.
Just because it's a world-renowned institution. They have equipment we don't have. We're not going to go buy a £1 million microscope, for example. So they have a vested interest, obviously, to be successful. And they're good at this.
Yeah, I think so. I read a stat that said something like 70% of Imperial founders are still alive after are still alive after 3 years or something like that, which is like crazy, right? Because in like the general market of startups, it's usually like a 99% failure rate, right?
Obviously startup failure rates. But then I guess Imperial startups are extremely tech driven. And so they're deep tech products, and you just don't know if it fails
within 3 years. Yeah.
So maybe the question set didn't work for Imperial.
This is true.
But the great thing is, they do spin out deep tech. So I think deep tech is extremely important for the future of the world.
Yeah.
Right? No one has ever built a revolutionary solution for the world in 18 months.
Yeah.
So a VC coming up to me and being like, "Oh, why is your go-to-market not 18 months?" I'm like, well, it's just not the business we're in, like, and it's not where you generate a timestamp in technology.
I guess maybe one of the hardest things about building deep tech is that you have to build first, then validate, right?
Yeah.
And for you, what was difficult about that process?
Fundraising. Fundraising. We could, I think we could have saved 2 years because we couldn't fundraise. Maybe, maybe it was the pandemic, so we raised during the pandemic. It was tricky because you couldn't see anyone face to face, and we hadn't raised before. But I think if fundraising would be a less extensive process and a kind of more streamlined process, I think lots of companies in the deep tech space would make advances quicker. Yeah. But I understand, vetting has to be done and so on. But sometimes that you look at what is being funded in the world, and you're like, okay,
but like FTX,
that's a whole nother chestnut.
True.
I wish founders would do less things to make other founders' lives
more difficult. Yeah, I see what you mean.
The same with like Elizabeth Holmes, right?
And have you ever been compared to her?
Yeah. Well, yeah. In looks even, and I was like, all right. You're like, oh, you look a bit like Elizabeth Holmes. I'm like, what does my looks have to do with my investability?
Exactly. But how does it make you feel when that is like the anchor people like to draw, right?
It's a shame. She had an opportunity, and it didn't go as it did for her. I'm not an expert to say what went on in her situation at all. But in my opinion, there is a dual blame to be had, right? She for sure did wrong, but giving someone $900 million, dollars to do something
at 17, right?
Yeah, I think she was a bit older when she raised that amount of money. Yeah. But $900 million without a product in market, I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not just the founder that's at fault. There are many points where governance was missing.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunately she's the face of this, which was her role. And unfortunately she's a female, medtech founder. And
do you feel like her sentencing was harsh because she was a female, right? Because what was it, like 7 years, something like
11,
that?
I think.
11 years in prison, versus this whole FTX thing. He goes and speaks on a panel like less than 7 days after, right?
Yeah, I think there's nuances to it that are uncomparable. I think one of the nuances is that she was playing with people's healthcare.
True. Yeah.
And it's just nothing to be played with.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, like, where was the governance on that? I mean, even us as a tiny startup have a governance process where I, as a founder, can't make all decisions.
Yeah.
And so why was that not implemented? And why was the board not implementing it? And why weren't there any security checks on this? I don't think that's solely her fault. I think she got the brunt of it. But she was playing with people's healthcare as opposed to playing with people's wealth.
Money, yes.
Arguably neither is great, but playing with cancer data and not giving them accurate data is
very bad.
It's very bad. And I think that's why maybe the sentencing was that harsh, because they had to kind of make an example and say, you can't do that. If you're in healthcare, you can't do that. But it had a backlash. It had a massive backlash on, I think, the ability to fundraise in this space.
As a female founder.
Founder, maybe even more, because humans are humans, and so and decisions on investment are made within seconds.
But it is an interesting topic, right? Because essentially you're always in healthcare balancing a very fine line of I'm building a startup, and I want to grow fast. Yes. But also I'm in healthcare, regulatory compliance, and ethics is hugely important. So how do you kind of like balance those two elements?
I don't have a problem balancing them. I have a problem with the funding side. Yeah. So if you go to someone and say, this is our project plan, and this is what we need to do, and this is how much money we need to raise, and this is our return on investment. A financial person looks at this and says, how can I reduce time to market? And then the pressure comes in. For me, and this is maybe myself, I think everyone who runs a business should be financially driven to an element. I am, but what's much more important to me is impact. So what I'm more strongly focused on is how can we deliver the best product to women? So it's, it's around for longer. And that means, not committing, that fraud or crime or whatever, just to cut corners on delivery to market. And I think maybe that's a difference.
It's also a different type of product, right? Because when we think about what Holmes was building, it was like accessibility for all. In a way, in IVF, what you really want is a luxury product. It is a very tailored product because IVF still today is mostly only afforded by women of a certain means, right? And so therefore you are already in a very niche high-end market.
Oh, uncomparable to what Elizabeth Holmes was working on completely. Uncomparable to what she was working on. It's just the fact that she's in the same industry was complicated. But the teams, where she's, what she wanted to do, she had investors that had put 900 million. I mean, how, have to be valued at 3 billion to raise 900 million. And then you say, well, it's another 3 years to market because our regulatory our product isn't working. It's a tough conversation to be had with investors. It's not an easy one. And I wish that investors were more open to driving for the same output, right? If everyone was aligned on delivering impact and quality over immediate financial returns, we might be in a better place.
Yeah, sometimes I think with STEM, it's also that maybe we are not as good at communicating the common denominators, right? Yeah. Because again, there's a huge advantage to actually not understanding, right? Which is where she came from, 19, never finished university, science founder. And there's a huge advantage of that, which is I can briefly explain what I'm doing to you in 5 words, right? Yeah. Which for someone who's technical, it's challenging.
Yeah. For sure, especially if you're deep inside. I think it needs both. I just think that people need to stick to the honesty part of it. That's important. And that there needs to be an openness, right? Someone who invests into medtech startups, they shouldn't go in with, a expectation that is unrealistic. In medtech, quality over everything.
Yes.
So same in pharma, quality over everything. Yeah. And, you're playing with people's lives. It's not, it's much more, than in other worlds, which is why the return on investment is so high in these markets.
And, so say you close everything, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? What is Impli doing in 5 years?
Hopefully running a large organization helping millions of women around the world. So on the market in the US is the timeline then, and the US is our biggest market.
And that would still be IVF.
Yes, I would still be IVF. Hopefully by that point, we would have also started clinical trials on all other applications with a wide range of clinics out there. Our aim is to scale. Our aim is to deliver real-time medical data to women. And that's important for us. But go-to-market is for us a big moment, and one to celebrate.